Hi, I'm Mike Dilk and you're listening to the Relax Back UK show, the show that explores all kinds of health topics relevant to you, your family and your friends. Each week I talk to expert guests from a range of backgrounds to inform and entertain you. So please do join the Relax Back UK family and stay tuned.
Hi, and thank you for joining me on the Relax Back UK show this week. The topic is the state of everyone's teeth, particularly teeth in the UK. My guests are dentist Dr. Bihal Chowdhury and a dental patient, Chris Gooby. We look at some of the reasons that it can be hard to get an appointment to see an NHS dentist and the role that private dentists have. But first, some thoughts of mine and info that I've gleaned from literature and around via some research in the area. I am very keen on the Which magazine. I think I've mentioned it before on the show, and this month they have an article entitled Disappearing Dentists, and let me just read a little bit from it for you. In September 2023, we surveyed 7,422 Which members about their dental experiences in the past 3 years and found the majority, 57%, paid for their most recent appointments as a private patient, missing out on the more affordable NHS prices. Most were happy with the quality of treatment, but it's clear that many felt they had no choice except going private. Nearly 4 in 10 said they had no NHS dentist in their area or were unable to register with an NHS dentist. It seems in many cases NHS dentists are vanishing. Several members told us they were registered with an NHS dental clinic for years, only for that clinic to go private and stop providing NHS treatment. Now, they do say that generally patients were happy with their dentist and they've been sort of sticking with their dentist for years. And that's my experience as well. You know, if you find a dentist, you go, the rest of your family goes, and you stick with them if you've got one in the first place. But Which go on to say, NHS appointments for new patients are hard to find. The NHS's annual GP patient survey for 2023 found that only a third of people successfully booked an NHS appointment at a dentist they hadn't been to before. Existing patients had around an 8 in 10 success rate. So it does seem that it's hard to get an NHS dental appointment. And Dr. Bihal Chowdhury has some thoughts on this.
From COVID, there's been quite a backlog of patients that weren't able to be seen. That now has a bit of a spiraling effect where it's really hard to get rid of that backlog or reduce that backlog if you don't have more dentists and more practices taking on patients, which ultimately will happen if you have the funding for it.
So there is a backlog, quite a big backlog in work that needs doing. This means that by the time patients, this is NHS patients we're talking about, get to see a dentist, work needs to be done that is a bit more serious than it could have been. It's more than prevention. Now, Dr. Chowdhury says that the NHS is set up best for preventative work, which kind of makes sense. Prevention is better than cure after all. And due to the way that NHS dentists are funded, it's harder for them to do serious repair work. The whole system works much better for prevention. But if there's a backlog, this prevention work hasn't happened. So serious repair work really is often when private dentists step in. Whatever the reason, there really is a serious problem of getting to see an NHS dentist. And it has reached the notice of some of our politicians. In Prime Minister's Question Time in January, one MP, the MP for Ipswich, Tom Hunt, he's got a potential solution.
Speaker, access to NHS dentistry is a key issue in Ipswich and Suffolk. Locally, actually, we've done something about it. The University of Suffolk and the local NHS deserve great credit for establishing a new dental centre which is going to carry 18,000 hours a year of NHS dental appointments. However, a source of great frustration for myself and a number of constituents is that many people who train to be a dentist at university for 5 years and have their training heavily subsidised can immediately go private or actually go abroad without giving anything back to the NHS. This seems wrong to me. Would the Prime Minister support the view of many of my constituents that for say 5 years they work in the NHS, they give something back, and this will make a huge contribution to this problem? Prime Minister, my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for better dental access in his constituency, and I congratulate him on the new dental centre that's opening, which I know he worked very hard to deliver. And I agree with him. It's right and fair that we seek better value for the significant investment that the taxpayer makes in the education and training of the dental workforce. That's why, as our workforce plan outlined, we are exploring whether a tie-in would ensure that dentists spend a better proportion of their time in the NHS, and we'll be launching a consultation on this policy later this year.
Now, that was a question asked by him in Prime Minister's question time. Now, could this help? I don't know. If funding is the issue and the amount of money that dentists get from the NHS to do the kind of more sophisticated work that needs to be done, and the NHS dentists are saying that they can't do anything but just basic preventative type work on the amount of money they get from the NHS, I'm not sure it's really going to help. Now, cost obviously is always going to be an issue, both for the government and the individual patient. And on that note, I want to go back to the Which magazine article where they talk about prices. They say, even in England, where NHS fees are the most expensive, they're usually much cheaper than private fees, sometimes by more than £1,000. They then go on to say, if you can't get a space at an NHS dentist, it's worth shopping around to find the best care at the best price, and ask other locals, as independent dentists scored highest in our survey. While it's obviously more practical to have help at hand nearby in case of urgent dental problems, you can look beyond your local area if options are limited, or to save money, as fees differ around the country. When we checked in November 2023, root canal treatment at Portman in Ilchester, Devon started at £475. At its Middlesbrough branch, it was £225. So there is a large variation in prices. Also, they give a couple, they've got a little table of various different things that you can have done at the dentist, and they have prices for the NHS and also for private. And let me give you a couple of examples. They have one example of tooth extraction, which is in NHS treatment band 2, and so that will cost you £70 70p on the NHS. And if you go private, obviously there's a range here that could be from £120 to £280, so big difference there. Let's look at another one. Crowns, so this is NHS treatment band 3. So on the NHS, that's going to cost you £306 £80, and privately £450 to £950. So, you know, there really can be a massive difference, and private dentists obviously are a lot more expensive. In the interview that you will hear shortly, I suggested that dentists are expensive, that private dentists are expensive, and I'm really not anti-private dentists at all, and healthy competition, but only really within a framework where it's possible to get an NHS appointment if you need or want one. And on that note, I've got to have a shout out for my dentist, the Alexander House Dentist in St Albans, Hertfordshire. I go there, the rest of my family go there, we get treatment on the NHS, and it is first class, so a big shout out to them. Another thought, just the last thought before we get on with the interview, maybe a crazy thought of mine, but who knows. COVID has provided kind of an impetus for online doctor appointments. When you ring your local GP for an appointment, often they'll call you back and it will be a telephone appointment. And I know that private GPs will do appointments on Zoom and all the rest of it. So there's lots of stuff going on in that area. And I wondered if such a thing was possible for dentistry, and if so, how it might work. I did a little bit of Googling and I found something for orthodontics, and that's kind of just the straightening of tooth, where once they've set you up with a brace to get things working, they need to check it quite frequently to make sure that your teeth are moving in the right direction. And they've got this system, or some of them do, where they can use your phone to get a 3D image to see if all the teeth are moving in the right direction and straightening up. I didn't actually see any dental checks online. If anybody knows different or has any thoughts on that, do let me know. I would be genuinely interested to find out. The best way to do that, I think, is my mobile. That's mike@relaxbackuk.com. Sorry, my email. I said mobile. I didn't mean that. Get in touch with my email, mike@relaxbackuk.com. So this whole subject, this whole topic, it is important. So please do stick around for my talk with dentist Dr. Bilal Chowdhury and patient Chris Gooby. So as already mentioned, there are private dentists and there are NHS dentists. And there are some dentists actually that do a bit of both. My guests today are dentist Dr. Bilal Chowdhury and also patient Chris Gooby. I started by asking Dr. Chowdhury if he is a private dentist.
Yes, that's right. Where I work at Evo Dental, the treatments that we provide are provided on a private basis, but we see lots of patients.
So
Sorry.
My first thought, actually, and just doing a bit of Googling around, is private dentists. You're just having a laugh, aren't you? That's why no one's going to the dentist, because no one can afford it.
No, quite the opposite, I'd say. With the NHS, the NHS was built on the motto of prevention is better than cure, which means that the system is set up to see patients to try and prevent problems from occurring and progressing. The issue arises when patients can't get into an NHS dentist, and by virtue of that, their problems maybe progress to a point where they lose teeth, and then they need more advanced treatment to try and restore them back to their original function and their smile. Even NHS dentists find it hard to provide those services on the NHS given the current pressures. And then they have to lean on the private system, or independent dentists, like we call it, to try and have those patients managed effectively.
Okay.
So there's definitely a place for us, and what the feedback we get from our patients is really good. Some of our patients at Evo Dental have suffered for quite a long time, haven't been able to see their NHS dentist for quite a while, and now they find themselves in a state where they need more advanced work done, completed. And unfortunately, in the UK, the current system isn't set up to do that in the public sector. So the private sector has to take some of that burden.
Sure. But so essentially what I'm getting at, all I was doing was just looking at the difference in prices between NHS and private. And the private costs change around the UK depending where you are. But
yeah, it
seems like the average for a checkup in London is £70 for private, and on the NHS it's £23. I mean, that's a pretty massive difference, especially if people haven't got a lot of cash to spare at the minute, have they? And then if they need a filling, a London price for a white filling is £140, and in the NHS I found like 70. So there's a big difference there, isn't there? That's why people aren't getting the work done.
Look, we know that NHS dentistry is always going to be priced below what private dentists charge. But what I will say is that for patients that don't go to see the dentist because they can't get into to see their NHS dentist, the issues that arise from that long term end up requiring a much larger investment. So if you look sort of 5-10 years down the line, they may have to pay a little bit more, or sometimes substantially more, to be seen in the independent sector. But ultimately, by doing so, they're preventing having to invest a large sum of money later down the line, 5-10 years down the line, similar to the treatments that we provide at Evo, where they have to invest to try and get their function back. So yes, there's definitely a price discrepancy between the NHS and the private sector. Does that mean that private dentists are, as you call it, having a laugh? I would disagree, purely because I think their ultimate aim is to try and see patients and get them to a point where the patients are healthy. And that, unfortunately, in the independent sector does come with a cost because it's not subsidized by the public sector.
Yeah.
I think the NHS being so heavily subsidized means that we're able to complete treatments, to a much lower cost to the practice. And when that
I'm actually not against kind of medicines in general, not totally against medicines in general,
Yeah.
and dentistry being provided in a competitive environment. I'm just trying to poke you a little bit.
Yeah.
Actually, let's talk about the NHS, because I think probably, well, actually, I don't know. You can answer. Do the bulk of people get their dental work done on the NHS in the UK? Most people I know do. I think I do.
Well, research that was commissioned by Evo Dental recently showed that, more than a third of the patients in the UK are now not being seen every as they should be every 6 months. I mean, a third of the patients that we spoke to hadn't been seen by their NHS dentist for a period of 2 years or more. So I think in the past, yes, most patients were being seen on the NHS. I think the recent pressures that the NHS is under, the lack of appointment availability, has now meant that I think that's dramatically decreasing. A lot of patients are now having to go private and having to see independent providers to just be seen.
And what's behind the problem? So why can't people find a dentist on the NHS?
I think it's a multitude of reasons, but the reasons that we've come up with are primarily based around, first of all, funding. So the funding for NHS dentistry has sort of more or less stagnated over the last 5 years. A lack of availability of appointments is also due to the pressures that have now resulted from COVID. There's been quite a backlog of patients that weren't able to be seen. That now has a bit of a spiraling effect where it's really hard to get rid of that backlog or reduce that backlog if you don't have more dentists and more practices taking on patients, which ultimately will happen if you have the funding for it. So those two together cause a bit of a situation where patients aren't being seen and the waiting lists aren't really coming down either. And then thirdly, I think a lot of dentists find that they're not able to provide the work that they like to on the NHS because of the pressures of the NHS. And then some of the dentists then move towards the independent sector, which actually further reduces the number of NHS dentists practicing in the NHS. So those three combinations, in a way, are a recipe for disaster long term. I think that's why we're going to see a large decline in the population's oral health.
Looking at it another way, and this has been in the news a bit recently, is it essentially just our own fault because we're not looking after our teeth properly? Perhaps this would be this question is to you both, but maybe I can bring in Chris as well here.
Well, my situation, well, there's a story. The last time I went to see a dentist was, I think, in 1968. I was 14. It was the school dentist, and it was a truly traumatic experience for me that meant I never, ever wanted to see a dentist again.
So you were put off at an early age?
Pardon?
You were put off at an early age?
Put off is putting it mildly. I was traumatized.
Okay. But in the meantime, did you brush your teeth and sort of look after them properly?
I think in as the average sort of person does, I think. A professional like Bilal might not consider I did, but yes, I brushed my teeth. Yeah.
And so, Bilal, do we brush our teeth as much as we should do in general? Is how much of this is down to us for really not doing the job and brushing our teeth for 30 seconds a quadrant twice a day and all that?
What I normally say to patients is it's always going to be a team effort. So the patients have got some things that they can do at home, like you've suggested. They can be brushing their teeth twice a day for a minimum of 2 minutes, flossing in between their teeth. But ultimately, getting in to see a hygienist or a dentist is equally as important, at least twice a year, because there are things that you won't be able to see. Even for dental professionals, there are things that, being a dentist myself, I can brush twice a day, I can floss in between my teeth. But if I don't have somebody look inside my mouth and check all of my teeth for me, there will be things that go missed. So the responsibility can't be with the patient, just with the patient. It's a bit more of a team effort. It has to be, the patients have got things that they can do at home to try and help their oral health, but ultimately they need to also be seen by a dental professional to make sure there's nothing untoward happening inside the mouth, which otherwise they won't know unless somebody has a look inside.
Yeah. So go for your checkups, go to the hygienist. That's can't be stressed enough, can it really? I'm thinking it. All right.
No, I'd agree.
There's been stuff in the news recently about teaching children to brush their teeth at school. And it sounds like Chris had some help with his teeth when he was at school. And if, he saw the dentist at school. Do kids really need to be taught to brush their teeth at school? Or have you noticed sort of toothbrushing is children aren't doing as well as they should be?
I think it's a fantastic idea. And I know that there's been some conversations in the media about whether or not this will put additional pressures on the, on the public sector in terms of schools. But schools also have a responsibility to children to talk about diet, sugar intake, and things like that. So I also feel like whilst they're doing that, talking about toothbrushing will ultimately benefit the children long term. And it wasn't uncommon for NHS dentists to send teams out to local schools in the past. So teams would go out to a local school that would normally comprise of a hygienist and a dentist and possibly some additional staff members as well. And they used to teach children how to brush their teeth and how to look after their oral health. Now, with the additional pressures on the NHS that we've just discussed, I think it's going to become even more difficult for these teams to go out into schools and do that if they're having to see patients in the practice rather than spending an afternoon or a morning in a school. So rather than that stopping, I think it would be beneficial for the children if the schools started to take a little bit more responsibility from that front, and maybe worked in collaboration with their local practices, so they could have some training, possibly come in and see what we normally say, and demonstrate that to the children over a period of time. It could be part of their curriculum, just like they discuss diet and food intake and which foods to avoid and avoiding sweets. You could, at the same time, you could discuss oral health and how to brush your teeth effectively.
Yeah, and it certainly can't do any harm, can it? Yeah.
Can I just say something there, Mike?
Please do.
My wife, as an ex-teacher, would say, where does the responsibility for bringing these kids up end with the schools and start with the parents? That's what my wife would say.
I think it's a fair point, actually. Although, it is true. I think this used to be done. Dentists did used to go to schools, that sort of thing, but happens less now. It's easy to lump everything onto the teachers, isn't it? No question. So
my wife says.
I think maybe that might be a show for another day. Let's park that particular thought. I've got a question which is somewhat unrelated to what we've been talking about so far, and might be more for Bilal. Is bad teeth genetic? Because my head is absolutely full of fillings. My wife has one filling, I think, and I'm kind of hoping that our children will have taken on my wife's teeth. But is it genetic?
There's definitely an element of dental disease that can be genetic, and we find that runs through families, and family members will come in with similar problems. Often it's related to gum disease, and the other half of it is environment. So we find that certain families will have, because they're in the same environment, they'll have the same habits when it comes to eating, snacking, their sugar intake, and ultimately that will also affect their teeth in terms of dental decay. So yes, the answer is it is genetic, more so for gum disease, but the environment that they're in will also affect whether or not they get dental decay. So there's a definite link there. We do find that quite often in our patients.
That's interesting. Now, one thought I had, I'm 57, and when I was a kid, it felt like every time I went to the dentist, I had a filling. And even as a child, I was thinking, is this really necessary? And it was different times. I kind of had a feeling even then as a kid, this guy's getting paid on piece rate. Are you nodding in agreement, or nodding thinking, what is he talking about now?
No, I think with the advent of more technology that's available now, sort of 20, 30 years on, we find that we're doing fewer fillings now than we were before. That's for sure. And we're also taking out less teeth. So people are retaining their teeth for longer. And a lot of that is owed to the technology that's at our disposal now as dentists that maybe wasn't there 20, 30 years ago. And that comes down to assessing teeth when you come in for your 6 monthly checkups. And also, things have come a long way now in terms of dentistry. So previously we may have drilled and filled, and now we might monitor those things because we've got the technology to be able to monitor dental decay a little bit more effectively. So it's a dynamic situation. It's developed over the last few decades. But yes, I agree. In the past, we were seeing more fillings being done. But I think ultimately the technology may not have been there for dentists to be able to monitor things properly.
Right. I get it. All right. One thing that I think is worth just talking about, if you have bad teeth, or you've had bad teeth in the past, haven't looked after them, whatever, can that lead on to other problems? Because I'm sure that I've seen articles that talk about the link between dementia and bad teeth. Whether it's just if you have dementia, you're not so good at brushing your teeth, I don't know. But what else can happen if you've got bad teeth? Can it lead to other things?
Yeah, well, research shows now that there is a direct link between gum disease and possible cardiovascular events. So it can actually affect your general well-being as well. So those patients that may suffer with gum disease for a long period of time may have an increased risk of having a cardiovascular event. So that's the first thing. And like you mentioned, there's also more recent evidence that suggests that there's a link with Alzheimer's. So there's definitely a wider link between your general well-being and your oral health, for sure. And I think that's something that we're still learning a little bit more about. And maybe in the decades to come, we'll have a lot more information as to how that's actually caused.
Okay, all right. You come back in 10 years and answer the rest of that question. That'd be good. All right, another quick question. This is to both of you. Maybe we'll start off with Chris. Electric toothbrush or manual toothbrush?
Electric.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah, I find it I'm much more comfortable using it. I perceive it to do a much better job. Much better. That's my perception.
All right, let's go back to the professional.
No, I would agree with Chris. I think an electric toothbrush is going to provide you a more efficient clean, and the onus is less so on your technique and more so on the device. But what I normally say is whatever you find most comfortable. So I have patients who have really good oral hygiene, but they use a manual toothbrush because in their hands that works better. And some patients might have possibly some musculoskeletal conditions, problems with their joints where they might struggle to use an electric toothbrush, in which case a manual toothbrush is better for them. So I normally say whatever works best for you. There isn't a right answer, but if you have a choice between an electric or a manual toothbrush, then pick the electric toothbrush.
Okay. I have an electric toothbrush. I like it because it's got a 30-second timer. So I know that I'm getting 30 seconds of quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
My whole family laugh at me because of that, but that's why I like it.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of last question, because we're running out of time, and this could be the most important one. If people are suffering, like they've got pain or they feel they need to go and see the dentist for whatever reason, but they're having trouble actually finding one, what can they do? What advice can you give?
So firstly, if patients are in pain, so if they've got something that they would classify as an emergency, they've got some raging toothache, then they should call the NHS 111 service, and they should be able to be directed to an emergency dentist. But if they've got some general oral health needs that need to be looked at, then I would say that trying to find an NHS dentist on NHS choices, or alternatively go to an independent provider in the area for a checkup. But if you're a patient who's got sort of multiple missing teeth or loose teeth, possibly you wear dentures that are loose, or maybe you've been told by your dentist that you don't have enough bone for implants, then, a little bit of a plug, but I would probably recommend that they go on our website at evodental.com, because those are the sorts of patients that we see on a daily basis who have lost their teeth over a number of years and or in dentures and need a solution for fixed teeth. And that's where we can really help.
Okay. I'll second what Bilal just said about Evo Dental. Changed my life.
Yeah, very good. I mean, glad to hear it. I mean, there's no question that having teeth as opposed to having gaps makes a big difference into how you can function and how you feel. Let's face it.
Huge.
Yeah, most definitely.
Good.
Huge
All right.
amount.
Thank you very much to both of you for chatting, because this is an important issue. People tend to kind of gloss over it or find it kind of amusing, but it is very important, and it suddenly becomes very, very serious if actually you're suffering from gaps in your teeth or missing teeth. So thank you to both of you for chatting.
Thank you for having us, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to both my guests this week, and they were Dr. Bilal Chowdhury, dentist, and dental patient Chris Gooby. Thank you very much to you for listening, and have a healthy week until next week.
Thanks for listening to the Relax Back UK show. Join me, Mike Dilk, again next week for more fascinating interviews and chat. If you're listening to the podcast version, please subscribe, like, and share it with your family and friends. And have a healthy week. Until next week.